ladies and gentlemen, uh, JD's and Letterman. My name is Connor, aka the Kong Godzilla mashup Shin Kong, and I'm joined, of course, by my everyday illustrious co-host, Mr. Gabe Tice. Gabe, how you doing today, brother?
This is the closest I've ever come to being a wrestling enthusiast. Is talking about the movie we're about to talk about, and this
It's
whole
like a wrestling
little
match, yeah.
this whole space of the monster v monster. The horror creature feature crossover events. This is the only time I can imagine sitting ringside rooting for King Kong to hit Godzilla over the head with a chair or something like that.
That would have been
I
fucking
think
awesome.
this is I think the most overlap you and I have had in that region.
Yep, until I force Ready to Rumble on the show, this is as close as we are going to get, and we of course are talking about the not the most recent Godzilla versus Kong, which I believe is
Far from it.
also I believe it's also eligible for the show. I'm not 100% positive on that, but we are talking about the original attempt at this legendary showdown.
The
Um,
original attempt, such a loaded word, such a word coated with antipathy.
well, I mean, this is I like to say every time we talk about a movie that the movie's interesting, and sometimes that's overstated. But I think this one, I think it fits pretty well because not only is this kind of like the first try at something like this. I mean, not I guess
Technically not,
historically.
right? Technically not. So there's a really deep history behind this film, and
I'm glad you
really
brought that up.
the
Hmm.
whole the arena of monster showdowns, right? So
Yes,
really the first one of its kind is Frankenstein meets the Wolfman in
right,
1943. That was a sequel to the Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney Jr.
and
They
that was your
decide
introduction to horror, right?
so if you go back and watch our appearance on the Sledgehammer podcast series, my first horror movie was in fact Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. I think it's a great gateway to Universal monsters, to really that whole space of creature features, of makeup and prosthetic horror, if you want to call it. Definitely all of the horror that's really defined my taste in the genre, but just also as a stepping stone for what's led to a whole industry of crossover events.
Yeah.
Frankenstein meets the Wolfman pits the Wolfman with the Frankenstein monster, um, with very slapshot continuity. It's really more of a sequel to the Wolfman, and kind of pays lip service, I guess, to the chronology of the Frankenstein movies up until that point, but you can't track it with the scrutiny that people pay attention to these franchises with now, right?
Right,
But that's the first of its kind. And then Universal actually does a lot of crossover events with
right.
their monsters, right? They do House of Frankenstein that actually brings together, their big three: Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman. Although interestingly, they don't ever fight. They don't have a battle. They're ensemble casts in the kind of thespian way. Like they're all
Right.
players in
Yeah.
this drama, but they don't fight, which, considering the success that I'm sure Frankenstein meets the Wolfman was, I'm surprised that they never really went that route. It was probably a budgetary thing, or it was just a hassle, to
Yeah, it could. Yeah.
to
Maybe it was
scale
the
that up.
egos of the stars. They didn't want to. They didn't want their character being weak.
Well, it was really interesting in Frankenstein meets the Wolfman that you have Frankenstein being played by a 60-year-old Bela Lugosi,
Yeah.
who famously turned down the role of the Frankenstein monster in the original. That went to Boris Karloff, and
Yes.
uh, egos were definitely bruised when that happened. And I think the fact that it is actors who are synonymous with these roles, and not, in the case of kaiju movies, it's not anonymous stuntmen in suits. I think that probably plays a part of it. But yeah, it takes a long time before we get to this moment of King Kong versus Godzilla. Now, do you know much about the history behind this matchup? The really weird, I weirdly, Frankenstein late in history of this matchup.
This is where things get interesting for me because I had seen this movie before, Godzilla or King Kong versus Godzilla.
Not Kong versus Godzilla,
No, I have not.
as
I haven't seen anything new, so I
yeah,
haven't seen the new one. But I have seen King Kong versus Godzilla, and I had seen the subtitled version of this. So I had seen the Japanese version. Of course, the version that we are talking about today has to be the American version because
has to
Japanese
be.
version's actually above a 3 on Letterbox. Um,
And the Japanese version is super obscure to American audiences
right.
still. It
Yes.
only just got an official release in the States with the Criterion package of the Showa Godzilla
Yes.
movies by Criterion.
Yes, which by the way, check it out if you're a big fan of Godzilla. I think it's anything by Criterion pretty much is if you're interested in whatever it is, it's worth the money. Same with Arrow releases and things. If you see a movie you enjoy there, please pick those up. Physical media needs to
But
survive.
I do just have to say, I love seeing the Criterion logo come on before a movie like this.
Oh yeah.
Like
Oh my God.
the most prestigious brand in home media, welcoming you into a movie where a man in a very bad King Kong suit
Oh, I can't wait to
shoves a
get to
tree
that
down
down
Godzilla's
Godzilla's throat.
throat. It's
Um,
it's perfect.
Yeah, but this almost was not a Godzilla feature. Godzilla almost wasn't involved at all, which is kind of interesting because this feels more like a sequel to the first like Godzilla film. It brings that continuity in of what happened to Godzilla. Where Godzilla gets
Vaguely.
frozen.
It's actually very
Uh,
reminiscent of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, where the Wolfman happens upon the Frankenstein monster who is frozen in ice,
right.
which is is and is not con continuous from where we would have
Right.
left off with
Yeah.
Ghost of Frankenstein. But at the end of Godzilla Rights Again, he was submerged in an iceberg, so there is continuity there. Although it
Yes.
makes you wonder why they were, why they were venturing out there when it should be a matter of record. The latitude and longitude coordinates of where Godzilla has been buried. You would think that there
Yeah.
would be a red flag or something
Oh,
around there.
there were so much in this movie that made no sense within the world that it exists in, but this world almost wasn't what it was. It was almost King Kong versus Frankenstein. That was kind of the pitch of what the script in this movie was going to be. It's kind of cool to see because some of the things I don't know if you've like heard about that script, but some of the things that were like it was almost like Kong, even though he was going to fight Frankenstein, it was almost like he was pivoted into the Frankenstein's monster role for this as far as his like equalizing powers
So
went.
what I had heard is that Toho wanted to make a Godzilla versus Frankenstein monster movie. And that's the reason that Kong in this version is powered by lightning, because originally he was going to be the Frankenstein monster. Now, I believe that there was another concept by Willis O'Brien, the man behind the original King Kong, to have a King Kong sequel where he fights a Frankenstein creation. So I think um, there's lots of legend and rumor
Right.
surrounding this, but it sounds to me like there were like two people wanted to make uh King Kong versus Frankenstein and Godzilla versus Frankenstein, and when that reached Toho Studios, they saw an opportunity to pit two of the most famous kaiju in movie
Hmm.
history against each other. But Frankenstein, no matter how the story played out, did really play a crucial role in making this happen.
A very crucial role on both sides because I from what I've everything I've seen, uh, I think the script that Toho got that was reworked into this was a like Kong versus Godzilla or Kong versus like Frankenstein creature type thing, which is really cool to see that kind of like they're like both both monsters were going to fight a Frankenstein-esque being, and now they're coming together to fight each other, and not with some liberties being taken to make that fight. Um, let's say a little bit more fair or believable. They had to stretch some things a little bit compared to
Well,
what
King
each
Kong goes
original
from
film
being
was.
able to climb the Empire State Building to being the scale of the Empire
Yes.
State Building,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the only way an actual fight between him and Godzilla is
Right.
fair or balanced.
Yes.
Fair and balanced, like Fox News. No.
Well, and they had to give him well, Jesus, and they had to they had to give him some we'll say powers as well. They had to of course Godzilla, a massive giant creature with armored skin and atomic breath. They had to give Kong his electricity powers. um,
Again, like clearly a holdover from
right.
a Frankenstein version of this storyline.
But an equalizer in a way. I mean, they
Yeah.
do play it into, Godzilla having a weakness that is electricity, even though it doesn't bother him in the first movie. And then Kong being, being strengthened by it. It's an interesting route. I mean, I will say this. I think both of these characters work better fighting each other when the intention is to bring them together in the story that's being crafted. I think, um, seeing trailers for Godzilla versus or for you know Godzilla
Kong
versus
versus
Kong,
Godzilla.
seeing that trailer and being like, oh, this looks like it might be a fair fight, and thinking back to watching this, it's like, oh, it feels like less stretches are being taken, and it feels like that because they kind of set it up that way from the beginning, as
So
opposed to
you have not
bringing these.
seen the new Kong Godzilla crossovers, the
Neither of them, no.
MonsterVerse
I have not
movies.
seen the verses, and I have not seen this new Empire movie. I'm very interested in seeing them. Like the new Empire. From everything I've heard, is like ridiculous, and I love ridiculous. But
It's not ridiculous in the fashion that this movie is ridiculous,
I would
which we'll get
imagine.
into.
Although
So
I did see that in the new one. Speaking of professional wrestling, apparently either Godzilla suplexes King Kong or King Kong suplexes Godzilla like a wrestler. Like, they do a wrestling move in the movie, which hey, that
well,
anything
the
to get you to see
fights
it, right?
between Godzilla and Kong in this original movie are very reminiscent of sumo wrestling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So
it's gonna. I'm excited to get to that point, but I think we just like the movie should wait for over an hour of talking until we discuss that fight.
I think that we need to have really bad dubbing in, in the final
Dude,
recording of this.
I will spend hours re-recording this episode just to dub over our voices.
So we watched the American version, which
Yeah.
was this really unique hybrid production in the history of Godzilla. So to also kind of set the stage for where this movie is in the franchises of both of our titular monsters. This is the third Godzilla and the third King Kong movie.
Yep.
King Kong had a sequel, Son of Kong, that was released the same year of the original 1933. That shows you how quickly films were made versus the years and years of development and production and post-production that these uh, flagship movies are spent on now.
Yeah.
And then Godzilla had the original Gojira, and then Godzilla Raids Again. This is the first time these monsters were shown in color, although King Kong has seen better days. That poor guy has seen
Dude.
better days in past and future. We'll
Man.
get to that,
Yeah.
but that also speaks to just how monumental of an event this was, how much that these characters had evolved, and um, how much of a footprint they had on the culture. It had been like 3 decades since those duo of Kong movies came out, in the heyday of the Great Depression. And
Right.
still people like went out in droves in both West and East to see King Kong versus Godzilla. This was still a mashup they were dying for. And Godzilla was, quite young in his movie career compared to King
Yeah.
Kong. He had only debuted 7 years before this in 1954, but already he was so clearly the Rolling Stones to Kong's, the Beatles, that people
Yeah.
still thought that they had to see a fight, a true duel between these rivaling titans of cinema.
And who can blame them? I think that's something that everybody's interested in. Even in the sports world. I mean, if you have two titans of sports teams, people are going to tune in when they meet. I think we just saw that recently with the NCAA women's tournament. Being one of the highest rated basketball games period on ESPN in its history. People like when two Goliaths meet up with each other, and taking these two characters that were, I don't want to say ahead of their time, but they were sort of perfect for their time. They were terrifying pieces of history, and the fact that you're putting them together, I think it's an incredible idea. I don't know about. Again, I think it works better if this would have been a plan, to start with, so that it made a little bit less sense to, sort of take as many creative liberties as they had to. That said, it would make a lot of sense. I probably would have been one of those people back in that time period who would have rushed to the theater to see something like this.
Yeah, and it was a huge hit. I think audiences loved it. I think fans of both Kong and Godzilla, I mean, I don't even think the liberties you're talking about would have even like been on the radar of fans back then. I mean, the
Absolutely
culture was
not.
just
No.
so different. I mean, I
Right.
think, my dad, a huge King Kong fan, a huge monster movie fan, he wanted to see this in theaters as a kid. I guarantee you he did not blink at the fact that King Kong is now powered by lightning, right?
Probably not.
And I think he sat patiently through all the talking heads and all of the exposition scenes, because that was the structure that people were familiar with. I think people are just on a different diet, and we have different attention spans now. Not to make it sound like it like we're dumb for wanting more action from our monster movies. I just think because of budget and limitations of special effects, that's you sit through the movie, you get kind of flashes of appearances by the monsters, cameos, almost until the last 10 minutes, and that's when the rumble happens. Of course,
Yep.
I mean, the monster showdown was a really new experiment in cinema, right?
Yep.
Because the only thing I can think of prior to this, other than obviously the like the scenes of Kong fighting T Rexes and stuff on Skull Island in the original Kong. The only other precedent is really Godzilla Raids Again, which saw Godzilla have his first fight with a fellow kaiju, the kaiju Anguirus. But that was really more of a sideshow to that movie. It was Anguirus, being the underdog that he is, really wasn't a worthy rival to Godzilla. They were saving that, I think, very wisely for an event like this of King Kong versus Godzilla. But this American cut that we're going to talk about is really interesting because it does what the original Godzilla King of the Monsters re-release did, the Americanized version of the original Gojira, which is they decided to add scenes of American actors
Yeah.
and recut the original print. So they didn't just dub it over; they refashioned it into a new movie that would be more palatable for Western audiences. Now, I'm going to say something that's probably a little controversial. Maybe people think this sounds a little ugly American, but
Uh-oh.
I, I actually, more than in Godzilla King of the Monsters, I welcome it here because it really gives this the feeling of being like a global endeavor. That countries and cultures are uniting to produce something. You know what I mean? That's not just something that another country kind of exported to us. That this is something that we came together to do. Which I'm sentimentalizing a movie that has a lot of brown face in it, so I probably need to back off. But that's also just something that I accepted as a kid when I watched this all the time. I didn't see the what's the word I'm looking for? the the stitching. I
Huh.
guess I don't know what there's a word I'm looking for, and like always, I can't find it.
Well, you couldn't see the seams. You
The
know, it
seams,
was yeah,
yes, I couldn't
it
see the seams
was
as a kid.
yeah.
Like I can so obviously see them now.
So I'm gonna agree with what you said. Honestly, I kind of wish that this was a more common practice. I mean, obviously, when American films are released overseas, a lot of times studios will put in things that make more sense overseas. I mean, with the horror films of the 2000s, I don't know if it's something that they still do today, but there are some infamous examples, or I guess famous examples of horror films that portrayed certain color palettes in American audiences, but then that color palette doesn't mean the same thing over in, Asia. So they would have, the color grading would be different so that the colors would be more akin to what they see as, the colors that mean danger or sadness or, whatever else. And, of course, voice lines, sometimes plot lines are changed in films that go from one place to another, but I think it's really kind of cool when we have a movie that not only are there some changes to what's dubbed over or whatever else, but there are also additions that make it more palatable for the
Now,
people
some of
of
this is
where
just
it's being
coddling.
released.
Now, some of
Right.
it is just coddling. I mean, we open with this news reporter who I think works out of the UN newsroom,
I That has always felt awkward, and it felt more awkward this time when I watched it.
but it almost felt like a Bill Nye type of thing, like
There was a lot
somebody
of spoon feeding here.
has popped up to hold our hand and walk us through this bizarre story. I mean,
Yeah.
and they do something really cute where they bring in like these scientist types to try to explain the biology and the history and they really I, my wife who was watching this with me thought that they were trying to give some kind of legitimacy to kaiju science. I don't think that's what's going on. I think this is the atomic age. This is a period where public curiosity about the horrors and the wonders of nuclear energy is being fired up. I think they thought Americans would just get a kick out of this kind of jargon, kind of with Star Trek. I think it's just there to kind of give a little bit of color and pepper this tale of fantasy with with jargon and lingo that would have really fired up the public's imagination. But I don't think, I mean, there's no way to make this realistic or credible. And when you see the actual monsters and they're full of glory, I mean, it's cartoon logic. I mean, King Kong is transported to his epic fight with Godzilla on these helium balloons, like he's the house
Oh
from
my
Up.
god. I have written down in my notes, they just upped King Kong to Godzilla. Um, Incredible, by the way. I laughed so hard it hurt. I was crying. I was laughing so hard when that happened.
And that's not even, I mean, when we talk about the actual fight, I mean, that's when this becomes like a farce, which I'm saying in the most positive manner you could mean that, right? And that's where I think I differ with a lot of the people who go back to revisit this movie and cringe and they wince and they're like, thank God this was remade so that we could see this fight with all these special effects and the CGI and this moody lighting. And I know I have seen these new Kong Godzilla movies. You have not. And I'm
Mhm.
not going to spend a whole lot of time comparing them. I mean, they're just, I see really no point to that, but it's a testament to what we've come to expect or what we demand from these types of movies, how seriously we demand these movies take themselves, right?
Yeah, maybe this is a little controversial. I think there's appreciation to be had in both kinds of fights, but I'll say I do kind of lean towards today's modern CG monster fights. And not because of like the one thing that kind of pushes me back towards the side of the older movies is that I think they try to take it I think I agree with you. They almost try to take it too seriously where it's like I saw the clip of the suplex from the new movie, and I was like, I gotta go see this because that's crazy. That's what I want to see from these. I want to see, you know, um, effectively the video game Primal Rage. For anybody who's an old video game fan, Primal Rage is one of my favorite video games of all time. And the reason it is because you're giant dinosaurs and apes fighting and killing each other, and that's all it is. It's just a fight for the purpose of entertainment. And where I think that there's a lot of movies that it would make sense to, make people feel emotions, and that, if that's the point of your story, I'm not going to discount that, but I almost kind of miss the days where you just had two monsters fighting just because they were fighting. They were in the same place and they both wanted to fight each other. Because that's what this movie effectively is. They both end
Sure.
up in the same place. They have no reason to fight each other. There's no emotion behind these creatures. It's just they're just kicking the shit out of each other for fun.
Well, I mean, it is very animalistic. I mean, they're
Oh no,
territorial.
it's very much like a primal, it's primal rage.
Yeah.
The fight in this is just a less violent primal rage.
So the plot, and by the plot, I mean the excuse they came up with to make
Yeah.
these two monsters fight, which is really fine. I like how transparently flimsy this whole reasoning is, the logic is.
Yeah.
It's pretty shameless, which I approve of. And there's some meta value to it, right?
Yeah,
So
of course.
there's is he a pharmaceutical
Yes.
tycoon?
Yeah, pharmaceutical.
And he sends men out to Skull Island, now renamed Pharaoh Island for some reason, to find this mystical monster who we know is Kong, to give himself a mascot. Uh, am I getting this right?
So here's where I'm a little confused, and I don't know if I'm gonna explain this right, but from what it seems like, he says at one point that not enough people are watching their show. So I don't know if maybe this pharmaceutical company has some kind of program they're trying to get people to watch, or trying. I think maybe they have a show in which they're trying to push pharmaceuticals to people. I don't know, but the idea is that this island, they find out about this island because it's like rich in a resource that they're looking for like, their pharmaceutical company, but they're more interested in this giant monster that they can use to sell drugs to people.
Because when Godzilla resurfaces, this prick's main concern is to have a monster of his own to fight Godzilla with ratings, or because he
I guess so.
this is where obviously this re-edit really fails. I'm sure this is
Yeah.
much more coherent, or at least much more straightforward in the Japanese original,
Yeah.
even though I bet it was kooky in its own right. But yeah, basically it's a gambit for ratings. That's
Yeah.
why they go to find Kong, which is pretty true to the spirit of the original, right? Where it's these filmmakers who go out to Skull Island to film a production and then, find Kong and make him an exhibit. There it's about spectacle. Here it's about ratings, which was intended commentary by director Ishiro Honda, who was the director of the original Gojira, and he would make many of the Showa era Godzilla films. So I like that there is still this satire as an undercurrent, even though it's really obscured by by the American re-edits. Like, we're cutting more to footage of this random American newscaster than our own protagonists, our main cast of characters. But that's basically what's going on, and that's all you really need to know.
Are there real protagonists in this movie?
Well, they're the
Like,
two fellas that are sent out to the island.
I guess you could consider them protagonists.
Protagonist is a strong word.
Filler
I actually,
characters, I would say.
and maybe this is because they're not celebrities to us, these actors, but
Yeah.
it does still keep the focus on King Kong and Godzilla. Like, a big problem that people have with the MonsterVerse movies is, they're getting, A-list actors, they're getting high profile actors,
Right.
Alexander Skarsgård, Rebecca Hall, and these actors don't want to play second fiddle to, King Kong and Godzilla. So, and like Matthew Broderick in the original, it feels like they become the stars and our titular monsters. The reason that we're all there to see these movies, they're actually side characters. At least that's the impression people get, which is really not the impression here at all. Even though King Kong and Godzilla don't have that much screen time, they still have the spotlight on them. They are still clearly the reason we are here for this movie.
Yeah, I think it kind of throws off the balance a little bit. I think there's a happy middle ground between what we get in movies now and what we got in, or what would just be effectively just focusing on the monsters. Though I think this movie goes too far with it because it does put the spotlight on the monsters, which we want, but it spends so much time with these other characters that time just feels like extra long filler. Like it feels like
Mm-hmm.
we're just wasting time. I think there's a difference between not liking characters and not wanting to see them on the screen, which is the big complaint we get a lot about. We've gotten that complaint even in the movies that people like about in this new MonsterVerse. I mean, Godzilla from 2014. People said that we spent a little bit too much time with characters. They didn't hate the characters; they liked the movie, but I would have liked to see more Godzilla in that. Okay, Kong Skull Island. Not a lot of people had a lot of complaints about that movie.
I
But
do.
but when they did, it was about some of the characters that they had to deal with. Godzilla King of Monsters, that was the biggest complaint about it. Why are we spending so much time with all these characters that we don't care about?
Well, it's
And
not just that
so
we spend time with them; it's that we're asked to invest a lot emotionally
that
in
is a
their
difference.
stories.
Yes, yes.
Which you might see these characters as filler. I think they're funny. I think they're likable.
There are
I
funny moments in this movie for sure.
intentionally and unintentionally.
Yes,
Although it has that Adam West Batman tone, so it's hard
absolutely
to
it does.
call it unintentionally funny. Uh,
But I do think that there was some things that they didn't anticipate to be. I mean, Kong specifically has to be something that they didn't want people to laugh at.
I don't know because apparently the creative team was directed by Toho to ramp up the comedy, ramp up the camp value. Like they saw an opportunity for humor. They did not take this seriously in the manner that I think we think of that now. Just like the hype was there, but the treating this like like it's World War II history, or it's you know something like mythical and epic in every like meaning, like every possible meaning of that was not there. Like it is a giant ape and a giant lizard fighting. um for what reason? Who cares? Or what does that really matter? People might call that dumbed down. I've learned to embrace that as really as a respect to entertainment. You know what I mean? Like a respect to spectacle
Yeah.
and to humor, and prioritizing that over substance, which
Yes.
depending on what you're doing could be miscalculation or it could be strategically sound.
And and that's one of my biggest complaints about movies today. I remember a time where I was like, man, like if 9/11 has taught us anything, it's that,
Oh boy.
these no, listen to me. This will make sense in a second. Because movies before 9/11, there'd be gigantic, explosions, buildings being toppled, and it was like people just moved on like nothing ever happened. And I remember watching movies and being like, man, like there are probably people in those buildings. There are probably, like these people have lives and now they're just gone because of whatever this is and nobody focuses on that. And then like a couple movies came out and then like that's what happened in them. I mean, one that I can remember thinking like, "Oh wow, they're actually saying this in this kind of movie" was when they did it in Batman versus Superman. Not a great movie, but I was surprised to see them, show the effects of these
But
superheroes.
that was a response to furious backlash from
Oh,
Man of Steel.
yes. Yes. But seeing it, I remember thinking like, man, I hope more movies do this, and I kind of hate that because now everything has emotion. Every like, I don't need every movie to be an emotional thriller. I don't need you to try to make me cry in every movie. If you have two giant monsters fighting each other, the last thing that I want to think about is how anybody but our main characters and our monsters are affected by this.
And it's really interesting how removed this is from the tone and the stakes of the original Gojira, which
I
is
mean, insane.
as grim of a monster movie that
I
you
mean,
can get.
it's nuclear war in the form of a monster.
Yeah. It and it is so personal
Yeah.
to Japanese culture.
Yes.
And only 2 movies later to see that now become a vehicle for just popular entertainment, right? It's something that probably some people lament, but I think Godzilla's value as this beloved cultural icon, I think, has become too great for us to deny what this movie did for his legacy there. And I don't want to live in a world where Godzilla is only an omen of nuclear destruction. I like all of my Godzillas. I want Godzilla, the hero who teaches you to not pollute and clean up the earth, a la Godzilla versus Hedorah.
I don't know if I agree with that one.
I know I really learned, because that's the value that these monolithic cultural figures have, right? I mean, they're open to interpretation, or they're open to adaptability. They're Rorschach tests in a way. And what the people of 1963 wanted was not a reminder of the dangers of nuclear war, although I'm sure that was still a backdrop to the culture, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. They wanted to be able to return to this sense of stability and normalcy, and to be able to enjoy their cultures and enjoy their lives.
And I think too, as personal as a topic as that is to, the people of Japan at the time that they made the original, Godzilla or Gojira film, by the time that this movie had come out, we're just kind of, like you said, kind of heading off of like the most um, anxiety filled period in American history as far as the threat of nuclear weapons. I mean, my wife and I, she just started the Fallout series, and
Mm.
that kind of starts with this anxiety of nuclear war. And of course, like the video games, I'm not going to discount the games. I played the games, but I'm just saying, yeah, like that was a fear, and so I think there's a difference between kind of showcasing and reflecting what society is thinking about and feeling of that time, but I think there's also an escape. And I think films for a long time, since they started, for a lot of people, an important thing about watching movies and television and taking in plays and music is to escape from what they're going through, escape
And
from issues. And
that does honor the tradition of this medium too. I mean,
yeah,
King Kong was probably the most pure work of escapism produced out of the Great Depression. And that doesn't mean it's meaningless. I mean, people have analyzed
exactly.
King Kong, and he has become a culture with us. He's become a figure of significant cultural weight. So escapism is not meaningless. Um,
Right.
it has a soul to it, but it invited you, like, this movie opens up with a quote from Shakespeare that there is more on there is more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. Now, little did we know that William Shakespeare was referring to the possibility of there being a giant gorilla and a radioactive dinosaur roaming the
Yep.
earth. Uh, but as cheesy of a way as it is to introduce that, this is about our curiosity of the fantastic and our love of the fantastic. So I just don't see this as a betrayal in the way that some people lament the later Showa Godzilla movies to be. Um, and it's interesting because this is the movie that cemented these as stars. Like, these are movie stars. King Kong and
Yeah.
Godzilla are not. It's not a stop motion figurine and it's not a rubber suit, like this is Mickey Mouse territory of significance, of rich cultural significance. And I love any movie that can do that.
Agreed. I do want to, however, pivot to a negative, if I
No.
could, because
Go ahead.
we've been throwing a lot of praise at this movie so far, and
I
we've
don't
kind
think
of
we've been
alluded.
throwing praise at the movie itself. I think we've been
We've
throwing
been
praise at the legacy and
Yeah, we've been
its
building up a
impact.
significance. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
we've been really
true.
kind of building this up and not hyping it up per se, but I do want to say something about this movie that I'm curious to see if you have any agreements with here. Um, Especially with this most recent viewing, where I didn't have somebody with me. I was just watching it by myself and just getting through an hour of nothing. You know, it's like,
And
oh
not
yeah,
nothing. No,
pretty much
sir.
nothing.
No, sir.
Pretty much nothing.
King
You know,
Kong
these.
fights a an octopus, not a
Oh boy.
puppet, not
No, a
a
real.
special effect, a
Yeah,
real goddamn octopus
yeah,
that son of a bitch in that Kong outfit had to wrestle with.
uh, yeah.
So there, it's not nothing.
It's pretty
Um,
much nothing.
it's not nothing.
It's pretty much nothing.
We have total disagreements about the meaning of the word nothing.
It's pretty much nothing.
All right.
A lot of exposition, a lot of awkward scenes. You know, of course, dubbing, which I love. But you know, it came to a point where there's so much of this, and then finally, Kong and Godzilla are on the same. They're on the same island. They're in the same place, right? They're face to face, relatively. So after all this exposition, after all this time, after everything that we've been through, we have Kong and Godzilla. They are on they are nearly face to face. One of them is on a hill, the other one is at the bottom of this hill. Okay? They're facing each other quite close. Close enough to fight. Kong lets out his atomic breath, and I'm like, "Oh my god, we're going to get the fight. This is great." We're an hour in. I waited an hour for this. This is going to be awesome. And then King Kong runs away. How
You sound like a
frustrating.
layman right now, Connor. You sound like an amateur kaiju
It,
viewer. Okay.
it's what happens, man. It's what happens. It was so anticlimactic. Like they couldn't have found any other way to deter these monsters from fighting. Like I understand you want to save it, even though we don't get the actual fight until there is less than 10 minutes left in the film. Uh, you want to save it. You want to build it up for the end of the movie. It's your main event, your grand finale. I get it. That's how you do it.
What the scene does is position Kong quite clearly as the underdog. And that's what drives the anticipation up into actual suspense. And here's an
Ooh.
interesting thing about this movie that people might misunderstand. So there was a rumor that the Japanese cut of this movie had Godzilla winning, whereas in the American cut, King Kong wins. Although I think it's still rather ambiguous as to at least what winning means in this case. But he's the only one who surfaces. Now, what I think people expected is that the Japanese would want their monster Godzilla to win. That he would want they want Godzilla to vanquish this avatar of the American Empire in King Kong, when that's really not the case. You know, the Japanese movie going public adored King Kong. He was just as much of an icon to them as he is to us in the West. And in the movie, the characters that we are following are surrogates for the audience in that they desperately want King Kong to win. And there's a huge level of suspense to the question of can he defeat Godzilla? Nothing else in their arsenal can stand a chance against Godzilla. Not their toy tanks, not their toy airplanes, not none of their toys, none of the weapons they have in the toy chest. Can King Kong defeat Godzilla? And that first encounter would lead us to believe that he doesn't stand a chance, really. Not until they learn again that he has, you know, lightning powers. I don't know what else to call it. They're lightning powers.
See, but okay, there's a few things that I'm gonna jump in and kind of push back on that because I agree with you in principle. That's great. You know, again, wrestling fans, so I totally get the idea of building up the underdog, right? There's no way this guy's gonna win this fight. But using a little, psychology with it, right? Like, wouldn't it make more sense to have a brief encounter between the two where Kong Kong looks more cowardly in this than if he were to have just been like, he comes up on Godzilla, maybe he like, gnarls up to try to fight him and then Godzilla just smacks him down and Godzilla's or King Kong's down and Godzilla just moves on like Kong's not there, right? Something like that would make a lot more sense than just Kong running away. Uh, sure, Kong's never seen anything like that, but he fights monsters on Skull Island. That's the whole idea, right? So um, the fact that this meeting is so anticlimactic and then leads to one of in my opinion, a very dumb decision. Because okay, so the electric powers and all. Let's just completely get rid of the fight for just a second, right? Let's get rid of the majority of it until we get to the end, okay? And the reason I want to do that is I want to ask you, how does this fight end? How do we end?
With the two of them diving into the sea, falling into the sea.
Where does Godzilla come from?
The sea.
So as soon as they hit that water, Kong is completely out of his element. Should Kong have really been the one to resurface if he is completely out of his element? We don't. It didn't make any sense to me. We literally end this fight in Godzilla's domain, and he loses.
Well, we don't know if he loses. It could be a draw. That's how
The
I've
no
always
no no,
interpreted
but
this. It could be a draw.
it could, but the way that the Japanese version, sure, I understand why you'd want to say that because the Japanese version ends with the Godzilla roar, the famous Godzilla noise that I love hearing so much.
Well, then this movie's it's perfect for you, man, because they do not stop playing that roar. I mean, that
Oh,
roar
I
is
love
on
it.
repeat,
Yeah, I love it.
especially during the fight.
I love it. Well, I love it. I guess I love it when it makes sense. I'll
Yeah.
say that. But I just thought it was completely ridiculous that this version ends with Godzilla, or I'm sorry, King Kong standing up out of the water and walking into the horizon with no god. Like I want this. I want to know that Godzilla. I want to know that it's a draw. Like I need to be spoon fed that because right now, what I believe, with based on everything I know from fights, maybe Godzilla wins the war. Maybe they come back, they fight again, and that's what happens. And that's what I'm gonna be led to believe. But what I'm led to believe right now is that the guy walking away from the fight just won it. And that's what happens at the end of the movie is Kong emerges and walks into the sunset and we don't hear that Godzilla's still alive. We don't know that Godzilla's still alive. We don't know what happened. We just know that Kong is at the very least the winner of this fight unless they landed in the water and said, you know what? Let's just go our separate ways. And I don't like that version either. It just doesn't look. I'm okay with Godzilla winning.
Imagine that that there's a bar fight, right? The two guys are going at it, destroying the whole place. What do? You take a bucket of cold water and you splash it on them to cool them off, right? Hey guys, cool off. That sobers them up. They're like, "Hey, I'm sorry, man. I don't know what that was all about. It's okay, man." And then what happens? You shake and you go your separate ways. I have a more pacifist reading of this climax, is
Oh
what I'm
man.
saying. I have a this climax really embeds me with hope that we can put aside our struggles, and settle things man to man for the, you know, for the hopes of mankind. That's how I read this climax. But I guess you have a little bit of more of a cynical edge to your analysis, and that's
it's.
okay.
I mean,
That's
it's just
okay.
difficult, man. I would have preferred like okay. I haven't
Look,
okay. I
here's the
haven't
thing.
put a lot
I
of
have
thought into
no
this, but
idea how this fight would end, and neither does Toho. What would happen if King Kong and Godzilla fought, how long would that go? What could possibly be the ending of that, other than one of them killing the other? And no way that's going to happen. Nobody wants to see that happen.
No, but I think if if you give him some false hope, like let's say Kong finishes the fight, however you want him to finish it on land is how I'd prefer. But maybe he throws King Kong, or maybe he throws Godzilla, back into the ocean, right? He just tosses him
Mm-hmm.
back in, and then Godzilla doesn't reemerge. Kong does the same thing, walks back into the water, tries to go back. He's about to swim back to Skull Island. And then as he's, getting to the horizon, Godzilla emerges and looks out into the distance at Kong. They're both, that's the thing.
Yeah,
Like there can be a winner of the fight,
The American
but
version kind of fumbled it a little by excluding that roar, although they clearly wanted to show Kong as the undisputed winner. Even though, even as a kid, again, I never read it that way. I took it as a draw. They fought. Um, they cooled off. Now Kong. I mean, Kong doesn't really have a beef with Godzilla. They're thrown together by circumstance. He just wants to go
well,
home.
yeah.
That's his only mission. That and to get drunk off of that Jamba juice that those
Good
villagers keep feeding
lord.
him. They turned my man King Kong into an alcoholic. Brother. I say this as somebody who has quit drinking. You got to get off the sauce.
it
The face he makes when he is downing, I'm sorry, guzzling that juice after his fight with that octopus. It is the perfect picture of insobriety to me.
and
Like
you
that is how
okay.
all of us feel after we've had one too many.
And you mentioned the face. Can we talk about the look of King Kong now?
No, we cannot because it is terrible.
That's why we need to talk about it. It's the worst, man. Like I had some issues with some of the scenes, in the King Kong movie from the '70s that we covered, and but
Oh my
overall,
god,
I
how
think
could
it
you
looks
even
pretty good.
complain about that
No, no.
after rewatching this?
Overall, I believe I said this in the episode, but if I didn't, I'm saying it now. Overall, not terrible. At least they tried. It doesn't even feel like they tried in this, man. This feels like that episode of SpongeBob with the ape, where Patrick's in the ape suit and then Patrick walks up and there's an ape in the Patrick suit. That's what this looks like.
First
It's
off, I still
awful.
think you're not being nearly kind enough to King Kong 76 as far as the effects go. Especially after watching this, just think about the fact that King Kong 76 was only like a decade after King Kong versus Godzilla.
Oh, it's
Like
it's a big upgrade from this.
it's a big
A
upgrade,
very big
and
upgrade.
frankly, I still say that I've never seen a more convincing, tangible King Kong put to film.
Mm, even like the CGI versions of them.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't agree with that.
My eyes prefer that King Kong over any Kong before or after. But
I can't. Yeah, I
that's
can't quite
it.
agree. I'll say I'll actually
That's
believe it
a
or not.
personal preference, but you cannot
Yes,
dispute
yes.
the fact that he is clearly uh, the best realized King Kong via practical effects through practical effects.
I would probably agree with that. I've always enjoyed the kind of claymation
No, I
stop
love that
motion.
stuff, but I'm talking about like convincing,
Yeah,
sophisticated, again, fully realized.
I would agree. I would probably agree. I honestly like I kind of agree with the original King Kong filmmaker that I don't think Kong should have ever been a man in a monkey suit. I don't know. Okay, it works with Godzilla in a certain way because that's they almost built that character to be portrayed by a dude in a suit. But I
Well, they
don't think it
did,
works the same way for King
but the
Kong.
technique just wasn't sophisticated enough yet. But I think King Kong 76 and Heisei Godzilla films are a testament to how sophisticated those, the suitmation stuff got. I think I would put uh, many of the Heisei Godzilla films against today's special effects. I really would. And again, there's a certain, I mean, there's just a personal affection I have for that art form. But I don't know. I will always prefer a Tom Savini kill over a CGI kill, even though neither of them technically triumph the other in terms of just, I guess, credibility. But but the but the creativity, the imagination of it, I just don't understand how CGI doesn't leave somebody feeling so cold compared to watching, uh, you know, the the real thing.
I think there are times where CGI works better, and I think there are times where it doesn't. I'll say this, like my favorite era of Godzilla, I don't know if they call it the Millennium Era or not, but I love the '90s Godzilla films. You know, I
That's
love
the Heisei.
oh, that's Heisei. Okay,
Yeah,
so the '90s Godzilla films, I love, and it's still a dude in a suit.
it's a
Um,
dude in a suit stepping on model buildings,
yes.
fighting model airplanes. The concept was the same, but you see how they modernized it.
Oh, they absolutely evolved it over time, and I enjoy that. Like I enjoy watching that. But on the other hand, I also, as we know, enjoy Godzilla from 1998,
Mhm.
and that is a CGI monster. I think there is a value to both of them.
But
If
there
I'm
was
looking
a
at it,
use of prosthetics. In fact, I think
yes.
there was some prosthetic Godzillas used in that film, right?
Yes. I think more so for the smaller, like the Godzilla babies, basically like their answer
Right.
to Jurassic Park's, raptors, but
But even the
um
CGI Godzilla is crushing miniatures, and is I mean,
yes.
there is the
There
interaction
is a
between.
practical nature to it. Not
Yeah,
every it's not a CG monster destroying CG buildings
which
in
is still
a
a really different that's still really different to me than, the MonsterVerse and the current Toho movies. Obviously, I loved Godzilla minus one for the reasons everybody else did, but I still lamented the fact that a Toho Godzilla film is you know scenes with Godzilla are made in a computer now, right? They're not made on set, and that is something that I'm always going to lament. Just as somebody who came into my love for these movies through the old school style. And that's, again, that's a personal preference. And look, we can debate the merits of CG or practical effects all day, but this is not a good representation of practical effects.
no. This
King
movie
Kong
is
might
not.
be this might be the low point for suitmation.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too is like you can look at movies. I constantly am saying that. Like I'll look at a movie like Ghostbusters and I'll be like, why can't you use those same effects today? Like they looked. It feels like the magic of movie making when you watch the original Ghostbusters and you see how they do these all of the ghosts and the beams and all that stuff. It just looks so great. And it would still look great today. And when you look at this movie, this is an example of like why I would be like, okay, sometimes CG might be a little better.
But
Sometimes,
it's not a case of practical versus CG. I mean, 10 years later, there was an example of suitmation that was the polar opposite of this in terms of quality.
yeah.
And you have to
This
remember,
is
this is
not.
the third
Yeah.
Godzilla film. This is
Right.
the third attempt by this special effects team. And some part of me wonders how much of this is watching such an icon being being given the raw deal here. Like if this was a random gorilla, um, a random gorilla suit, I I don't think I would feel that much. I think I would feel like antipathy or some kind of ambivalence, but King Kong deserved better. This is his first movie in 3 decades. He deserved better. But at the same
I
time,
agree.
I really enjoy the personality of King Kong here. I really love the little touches they gave him in his fight with Godzilla. He's a brawler, he's a fighter, he's got some pride. He's also clearly overwhelmed. There's just some little touches, some of the expressions or some of just some of the things he does throughout that fight that I think reinforce his personality and his characteristics that Western audiences love, and I'm sure the Japanese audiences did too.
Agreed. Yeah. While it is not a poster of what you'd like to see from Suitmation, I don't think it's a complete loss, but I do think most of the loss is from the King Kong side.
No, it's not a loss. It's, I mean,
I
look,
think
this is
the
where
King Kong is pretty bad in this.
it's like it's ride or die. This is where your affection for this era and this generation of special effects and in monster movies has to come into play. So I can't argue with the fact that this looks like shit. I'm not going to argue from that basis. I'm going to argue of I'm coming from a point of emphasizing the context of the time, right? It's like the same with early Star Trek episodes. Like you can make fun of those terrible effects, and I think it is fun to laugh at them and laugh with them. But just to point and laugh at an earlier time and not appreciate, I think, the context and what this moment in time represented. I don't know. I think it takes the fun out of watching older movies, and I think it isolates you from a whole generation of culture.
I no, I completely understand. I think where the issue comes in, where it's a loss for me, is more so in the realm of man in a suit, or suitmation, as they say. I think there is value to be had from it, both historically and and I know you hate to hear this, but I do think this is an example of so bad it's good. I do think it looks awful. Every time I see it, I think it looks awful, but it completely adds to the entertainment value of the fight later in the movie, and it adds to my laughter throughout the movie.
Sure. No,
Even though I'm not
I
snarky pointing and laughing, but it is definitely funny.
maybe my skepticism there is that I think was I think the humor and the goofiness of this film is, it wears that on its sleeve.
Yeah.
The camp value is intentional. I'm not saying they made King Kong look this way on purpose. I think they genuinely did struggle to use suitmation to realize a creature that was more, mammal-esque, more of a primate, something that had more humanistic features than a lizard, than a dinosaur.
Right.
But I think I think the best of these Showa era films, they knew what they were. They knew what they were dealing with, and I think they allowed themselves to have fun and allowed audiences to have fun with it.
I'll agree with that. I think that's I think that's very true when
And
you're
that's
watching
probably
this.
not a persuasive argument for the
I,
skeptics.
there's
But
always going to be
hopefully, I'm at least
haters,
highlighting how somebody can enjoy this, even in the year of 2024,
right?
even more than 60 years later. I mean, I don't even think I've processed how long ago this movie really was.
Yeah, but I will say too, like, but with what you said, I do think even for doubters, there's a reason to enjoy this. I do think that there are things about this that if somebody wanted to watch a movie, and like, I do think that there is a joy taken out of a film, or at least, an underestimating that you do when you kind of do a point and laugh. But I do think that there is that value to be had with this, that kind of classic sit down with your friends, crack some beers, open up
I
the bag
also
of chips
think,
and laugh. I think this movie does have that, along with its intentional comedy.
but I also think it is a good gateway. Like, I think if somebody is
Yeah,
asking me where to start with the Showa era, I would include this. I don't know
I'd
if
say
this is the
so.
first movie you should see. I think I would ask you, like, what's uh what's your poison, right? Pick your poison.
Right.
But if you want to see a good brawl and all of the goofy pitfalls that these movies fell into or allowed themselves to fall into, as I sort of believe, you know, I think this is a great place to start, and I think there's just a lot of good fun to be had, harmless fun when there aren't, you know, actors in brown face playing the tribesmen. But
Yeah.
that's a conversation I just didn't have the bandwidth to have today when talking about King Kong versus Godzilla. So we can have that conversation, I
Yeah.
think, another time.
Yeah. Wrong, but not the time. Not I'm not doing it. Just gonna pretend like it wasn't there.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like the show era rule of any scene with a man in a rubber suit is good fun.
Yeah.
Like
I'll say
that
that.
era of movie just never failed, no matter how shitty the surrounding movie was. Like, go take Godzilla versus Megalon. Um, just a bottom tier attempt at making a monster movie, really. Uh, they failed at everything that you should really like have in your arsenal if you're going to make one of these movies. But it's still a guy in a Godzilla costume whipping his tail at a guy in a robot costume. And I just can't hate that. I think I think that defies hatred. I think that defies boredom and contempt.
I will always love uh cheesy man in a suit fights. So give me all of it.
Now the question is, should you watch the whole movie of King Kong versus Godzilla? Should they watch the whole movie or should they skip to the fight? I think the proper context for the fight is provided by the movie. I think it sets the perfect tone. I think there's a lot of fun to be had along the way. I don't think you should miss the real spectacle of the movie, which is watching King Kong fight a real octopus
Huh.
that is wrapped in cellophane for most of the fight.
That's a tough question for me to answer here because on one hand I want to tell people like don't bother, just watch the fight. But on the other hand, I think you appreciate the fight a lot more when you've been through the movie. um, so, uh, yeah, I don't know if I can definitively say here. I do think if I had to say one, you know, if you're already interested in either of these characters or both of these characters or just this genre or what have you, I think it's worth it to watch the movie. I think it will help your enjoyment of the fight. I think it will you know increase how you come away feeling about our confrontation between our two characters. Um, but if you're not really interested in this genre of these characters and you just kind of are intrigued, then absolutely, I think you can just skip the rest of it and watch the fight. I think the fight is less impactful when you haven't sat through the rest of the movie.
It's a reward.
But
And that's
yeah,
the fun thing about these movies is that patience is rewarded. Like, you build up this fight for an hour and 20 minutes, and I think it absolutely delivers.
it's a good fight. I did like the fight. I enjoyed it a lot, despite my issues with how it ended, um, and you know maybe how long it took to get there. I think it did help my enjoyment of the fight when we finally got it, and I was like, oh shit, they're going at like it's a vicious fight for the era, and I think
It's vicious and
very
it's
entertaining.
creative.
Yeah.
I feel real animosity between these two.
I mean, shit. We've talked about it a few times. I mean, there's literally a part where Godzilla is getting a tree shoved down its throat by King Kong.
And then he
Who
coughs
doesn't
it
want to see
up,
that?
turns it into a fireball, spits it right back at King Kong, who really like takes that insult and like
He took that shit
pulls back
personally,
his
man.
shoulders like he's Henry Cavill in Mission Impossible Fallout. He's ready to take this to the next level.
he,
And
he cocked his arms like a shot.
it's I mean it's one step below that. And yeah, I think you rob yourself of context if you just skip to that scene. That being said, the history is made here in the last 10 minutes. I'm not going to argue that the whole
Yeah.
movie has this kind of like historical weight to it. It's that last 10 minutes that gives it the legacy that it has now.
But it's the rest of the movie that gives you the appreciation you have for the fight when you
Yeah,
finally
agreed.
get there and you're like,
Agreed.
"Oh my God, we're finally here. I hope this fight delivers." And to its credit, I think it does. For me, it did.
Yeah, it's like imagine if you know if the thriller and the Manila had no context, if there was no run up to it, if Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier just stepped in the boxing ring, threw some punches, and walked away.
I mean, it's the art of the cell, man. I mean, like any sport,
You
any
got
combat sport has to
you
do it. And even with the build to the fight itself, you have to have, like watch a UFC fight. It's not just that fight that they
the
put on the
only thing
marquee.
that was missing, right, is not saying Godzilla or King Kong do the Joe Rogan experience after.
Oh God. Oh God. Oh well. Maybe they will. Who knows? I'd like to see it.
I'd like to. I'd be a little scared to see it. I don't really need to know what their views on pronouns
Yeah.
are. I don't need to know what who they think really won the 2020 election. I just don't need to know them
That
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 well.
being said, I do think I think you have to have an undercard, and I think having King Kong face off against a real octopus and having this build, it's more than just a build to the fight. You have to properly set people's expectations. If you it's like if you put the main event on first. If you tuned into a UFC fight to see, I don't even know who's at the top of UFC. I haven't watched it in a couple of years, but you know, let's just say John Jones. Let's say John Jones is up on the marquee, and his fight goes on first. Nobody's gonna stay to fight, to see, you know, these
Yeah.
unknown guys fight each other. Nobody would have stayed for the rest of the movie. Nobody would have enjoyed the rest of the movie if we got to fight right away and then the rest of it was just filler.
Now
You have
I
to
do
put the
have
filler
some
in and then
disappointing
the
news
fight.
for you. And I don't know how you're going to take this, but unfortunately, both Godzilla and King Kong later sued Vince McMahon for inappropriate conduct.
Oh, fuck Vince McMahon. I hope they milk him dry. But yeah, I mean that being said, I want to check. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up with this movie before we kind of delivered our final verdicts here?
Now, I think we really dived into it. I think we really had some minor brawls here and there, but nothing
No,
worth
yeah.
demolishing a pagoda over.
I
My
will be
favorite
breaking things in
tradition
my
in
house
all
later,
Godzilla
actually.
movies is the need to demolish and level a pagoda um, by the end.
Incredible.
And that pagoda is well and truly demolished. So that's a great note to end that movie on. And this is a great note to leave this podcast on. So we have talked about King Kong versus Godzilla. This was a film that I wanted to talk about. So I'm
Yeah.
going to go ahead and just deliver my verdict, which I have wrestled with over the course of this movie because it's really impossible for me to separate my subjective adoration for this whole era,
Yeah.
this type of movie,
And for
everything.
context, it's a
Yeah,
it's 2.8 on Letterboxd for context for
yeah,
everybody.
which was depressingly low, although I can't blame people, and it's nice to know that the Japanese version is higher. But call me the ugly American. I really take all of these the corny talking heads and the seemingly wasted time on exposition and non sequiturs and overacting. I take all of that in stride, man, because it really all adds up to the same really wonderful experience. And I I don't know. I just adore this movie. I think it's an adorable little artifact. I think it's baffling without context, and it's good that we've gotten a modernized version of it. Even though I think we've really thrown out some of the fun. Like we've really thrown out, I think, the baby with the bathwater by really treating this era as something to be embarrassed or ashamed of. It's not. It was good fun. it was a stepping stone to what is unfortunately now the, one of the biggest trends in entertainment, the crossover. But King Kong versus Godzilla, I still think that's the blueprint. I think get some wacky characters, get some, really throw these monsters in, barely a reason to put them against each other, but just make sure that everybody's having fun along the way. And I think that's the recipe to have a blast at the movies. So I'm going to say that this movie is actually good. I mean, it's not
Ooh.
great. Uh, it's not even a high point for the Showa era, but that just tells you how fun the rest of these movies are. So if you've never seen one of these films before, if you want to have a good laugh and get a little bit of an appreciation for history, yeah, check out King Kong versus Godzilla and then binge the rest of the Showa era Godzilla movies on Max, on HBO Max.
Well said, sir. Happy that you brought this movie here. Always happy to cover a good monster fight. Um, I have a weird relationship with monster movies. I think especially these sort of kaiju's. I think it's a very love hate relationship that I have with them. Because I do have certain expectations when I go into one. Even sometimes to my detriment, one that is as historically significant as this one. Um, I think this is a movie that there's a lot of fun to be had with. I think there are a lot of really cool things about this movie that people, if they are fans of Godzilla and King Kong or one or the other, I think this is a must watch. Um, I'm not gonna tell you if you're a fan of this to skip anything and just skip to the fight. I don't think that would be worth it. If you're already interested in these characters, like dive into this thing and have fun with it. For me, as much as I like Godzilla and as much as I, am sort of indifferent about King Kong as a whole, to be completely honest, I just always have been. I didn't enjoy this movie as much as I wanted to. I think it's okay. I think historically it's extremely important and significant, and it's something that I think people need to pay attention to and acknowledge for what it did for the genre and even for itself at the time. But overall, I would say this movie has a 2.8. I would say that's around what I would give the movie. Therefore, I'm obligated to say that it is that bad. I think it's right. I think the audience is on the mark here, as far as my opinion is concerned.
Well, if you are unsatisfied with this cut, make sure you track down the Japanese original that
Yes.
it is certainly more of a worthy movie, in all respects.
Yeah.
But I will always have at least nostalgia. I'll always, remember the American cut fondly. I actually had flashbacks to real childhood memories watching this movie. It jogged some things that I did not know were there to jog.
I love when that happens. Don't you just love when you turn on a movie that you used to watch as a kid and just things just start flooding back to you? It's there's nothing
Yeah.
like that feeling.
And you remember just how fun it was to be racist, like all that brown face. I was you just rolled with it, man. Times were different. Times were different.
Times were different, man, and we're everybody's trying to bring it back, so we'll get back there at some point, I'm sure.
King Kong and Godzilla starring in the Daily Wire's next movie.
Oh no. Oh God, burn it to the ground. Burn this podcast to the ground.
Speaking of burning this podcast to the ground, I think it's time we bring this episode to a close. But first,
Yeah.
obviously, we are not dissimilar from the Daily Wire. We love money. We need money. Our religion is money. So
And we are whores to ourselves.
yeah,
So
so we're ready to plug away to our Patreon. If you guys
yeah.
want to not only support an independent podcast, but also get early access to exclusive episodes. If you want to get merchandise and slap a not that bad sticker on your laptop or on your forehead,
Or your
then
car.
or
I've
your
seen it
car,
on a car.
whatever,
It looks great.
whatever is stickerable in your
Yeah.
environment can now be adorned with the not that bad logo. So head on over to our Patreon if any of that sounds like a good time to you.
Agreed. And You can always support our Patreon. You can always give us your money if that's what you want to do. Like Gabe said, we are big fans of the money. However, that's not the only way you can support us. Obviously, liking, commenting, sharing our show, following us, subscribing to our YouTube channel, anything that you want to do to support us in that way, you can do. Heading on over to our social media, keeping up with our posts where we announce episodes and release links. But you can find all of that in one place if you head to our website, notthatbadpod.com. We have links to all of the places we post our show. We have links to all of the places that we are as far as our social media presence goes. We even have bios on your two favorite terrible take artists here, myself and Gabe, as well as how the show came to be and links to the podcast that started this all back in the day. So definitely check that out if you're at all interested in supporting us. We would love to have you as a part of the Not That Bad family, as the corporate world would say. But we want to thank you for all who are already supporting us. We see the website traffic; it's been tremendous. I definitely didn't see that coming, so thank you all for that, and thank you for the support across our podcast platforms. It's been amazing.
Yeah, and we have some really fun episodes coming up. We're trying out some new things that I think is going to be a lot of fun for both us and you guys listening. You're going to get to hear our opinions outside of the Not That Bad realm. We're going to touch on some topics that we've been meaning to discuss on here for a while now. So just be on the lookout for more content, both regular and new specials in the future.
It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. And before we log ourselves out, before I have Mr. Tice do what he does so eloquently every week and or every other week and take us out. I know you have something you wanted to let the audience know about.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. So I am going to be participating in a panel hosted by Roadmap Writers, a networking and training service for screenwriters, and they are hosting a panel for Neurodiversity Celebration Month, which is this month, April. And I'm going to be speaking with a number of other neurodivergent writers, executives, reps, etc., on the experience of being neurodivergent in the entertainment industry. It's going to be a free webinar, and it'll be a panel for both people in the community and those looking to be better allies, the best allies, because there is a lot of misinformation and misconceptions about the neurodivergent experience that people both in the community and outside can learn about, and we can all collectively develop a better understanding, which I think is really crucial to reaching full representation and inclusivity for the community. So thanks again for letting me plug that. If you guys are interested in attending that webinar, the link will be below. Again, it's free, and we would love to have you no matter what background you're from. If you're just looking to, again, develop a full understanding and an attempt to be more inclusive to the community, it's always appreciated.
Awesome. And so check that out if you guys are available on the date and time. What date and time? When is
May
this?
30th and April 1st. It'll be two panels on May 30th and April 1st, both starting at 5:30.
April 30th and May 1st?
Yes. April
Okay.
30th. There'll be two panels on April 30th and May 1st, both starting at 5:30 Pacific time, Pacific Standard Time. And again, the links and the other information will be down below.
Perfect. Yeah, check that out if you guys are available. Always cool to see Not That Bad having a presence across many areas, even if loosely connected. So very fun to see. Check that out if you guys are available. Again, like Gabe said, link will be down below in the description. But until next time, Gabe, would you like to take us out?
I would love to do nothing more, Connor. All right, guys. Again, this was a blast, but we have to plunge back into the sea and make our way back home. So I'm Gabe.
Re-emerging. I'm Connor.
And this is Not That Bad, roaring away as the credits roll.